I think that's true of everything in life. If you forget that you're a student first, we're either going up or going down. And you're not of value to your students as a master and a teacher. You're not of value as a coach. You're not of value as an athlete if you forget that you're a student first. We're always got to be learning. And there's always somebody that you can learn from.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of A Black Belt Way of Life. On tonight's podcast, I have international referee in both Pumse, forms, and sparring, Master Marc Zirogiannis. He's also the editor-in-chief of Taekwondo Life Magazine. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
You know, like we had our little pre-discussion before I start. I've wanted to get a high-level referee on this podcast, you know, for the main reason in the Taekwondo world, in the competition, I feel like you guys are the most underappreciated of the event. You know, you guys get all the hate.
It is very, very nice of you to notice it and to acknowledge it. And it is something that I think all of the referees are passionate about and happy to take the brunt of the good and the bad.
Sure. You know, with that being said, we're going to jump right into it. A word from our sponsor, Mr. Joseph Ferrone of White Realty. This episode of A Black Belt Way of Life is brought to you by Mr. Joseph Ferrone of White Realty. For all your real estate needs, both commercial and residential, don't hesitate to reach out to Mr. Joseph Ferrone. All his information is in the show notes. A shout out to our official apparel company, Best Martial Arts, Muto USA. For all your martial arts needs, check them out. Best Martial Arts, Muto USA. Their info's in the show notes. And also to the awesome people at Kick Fit. Nice looking shoe, right, sir?
Very nice.
Right.
I've never seen that before. Really nice.
Nice and colorful. Info is in the show notes, everyone. BBWOL at checkout for a nice discount on these amazing, awesome lightweight shoes. Sir, you are obviously, you know, we've crossed paths many times at competitions, nationally, locally, wherever. And, you know, one thing I always see about you are very passionate, something you brought up before, because at the end of the day, I know a bit about the inner workings of it. You know, from just being around for so long, you guys don't do it for the money.
No, that's for sure.
You know?
That's for sure. I love refereeing, and I love the core group of referees that I have the honor to referee with and referee under. Yeah. And it really is about trying to make the game, whether it's on the Pumse side or the sparring side, the fairest and the safest and the best.
Sure.
And I think the one thing that evolves as you become trained as a referee is that you start to understand that the best referees are in the background. That our goal there is not there's a misconception that we decide a match, that we decide who wins. No, we're
not supposed to.
Right. We have the honor of announcing the winners. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to let the fighters fight. And our goal is to just make those corrections of fairness and safety to be able to make sure that
I was always taught, you know, that a referee's number one job is the safety of the athletes.
Absolutely.
That's paramount above all.
Absolutely. And that's true. And I think in any combat sport and we are trained to know what to look for. By the same token, you want to be sure that it is a combat sport, so that while I'm worried about the safety of an athlete, I don't want to do anything to interfere with the ability of those athletes to engage and be engaged in combat, and it'll work itself out. So we have knockouts, we have 8 counts, we have times when people get injured, we have times when people withdraw because they can't take the heat. And our goal is to monitor that, make sure that it never gets to the point of no return.
But, right.
You know, let them play, let them fight. That's our goal.
We're definitely going to dive into all of that. And then we're also going to talk about, you know, from my perspective as a coach, as an athlete,
sure,
and then obviously your side of the fence as a referee, because there are battles at times, you know, but I'm a true believer in calm heads prevail, because at the end of the day, this is a martial art we're talking about, and we can't lose sight of that. In the Taekwondo world, we can't lose sight that it's only sport. No, it's a martial art before it's a sport. I'm a firm believer in that. So there has to be that element of respect, and sometimes, unfortunately, it gets pushed aside. But I don't want to say the few of us, I like to say the majority of us, we do have that respect, and we appreciate everything you guys do.
Absolutely. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, and that is what differentiates us from other forms of combat, whether it be boxing or whether it be mixed martial arts, is that, at our core, we come from a martial arts background. So for me, I don't, any of the highly successful programs that I see nationally or internationally originate from dojangs that are traditional Taekwondo dojangs that have competitive sports programs or value added on. And that for many of them, whether it be on the sparring team or the Pumse team, those become the high level achievers in the dojangs, the bonus group that has the ability to give back and be able to benefit from it. But at its core, it's still we're martial artists. We're and as you know, that's the background that I come from. I come from a traditional martial arts, and that's where I feel I love to be in the competition setting, but I love to be in the comfort of the dojang. And to me, it is it's all centered around tradition and respect for the people that helped to make this the largest, most practiced martial art in the world.
Yes. And now you brought up an interesting point, and that's where I was going to start tonight. I know your Grandmaster very well. I saw him actually last week, not the greatest of circumstances. He was at my Grandmaster Lee Moon-sung's funeral. He was there the first night, and this is a man who is a pioneer of Taekwondo in the United States, former Olympic coach. I had the pleasure of, a lot of people see my age, and I am 45 years young, I like to say, but in Taekwondo years, I've been around for a very long time. My father was Grandmaster Moon-sung Lee's first student, first black belt. And with that, I grew up around Grandmaster YH Park.
Sure.
Around Grandmaster. You can name them all. You know why? Because they all ate on my dinner table.
Yes.
And I was a kid, so I was always surrounded by the old, I guess you could say, however you could put it, the old guard, the originals, that immigrated from Korea to the United States and opened up Taekwondo dojangs, whether it was in Queens or whether it was in Long Island, other parts of, the tri-state area. So I was always around these guys, So where I want to begin tonight is the beginning of your journey in the Taekwondo world.
So for me, my journey started, I would consider myself to be the original Bob, the original kicking dummy, because my brother, who was, a voracious student of the martial arts, and I'm older than you, so the time that I come from was a little bit of a different time. Martial arts wasn't widely practiced as families. Martial arts was practiced at night, in unusual spaces by men. Adults.
Yeah, I've had many people on this podcast.
Yes.
We talk about that all the time. I brought up an interesting point. When you look at my father's Taekwondo class picture from 1972, all you see is grown men. You could literally, with a finger, pick out, and it was on one hand with fingers to spare, the amount of children and women you saw in that picture. It was all grown men.
And the way that those people came was the way that my brother came to it, which was that my original Grandmaster was Duck Sung, and under the Cheongdaekwon lineage. And my brother had watched every Kung Fu theater movie that you could get at the time, pre-VCR, studied every move, bought every book he could, and would practice all of his martial arts techniques on me. my parents begged my parents for martial arts lessons, and my parents tried to find, there were not many schools, but most of the schools wouldn't take young teenagers. Finally had connected with Duck Sung and one of the locations, and he agreed to give my brother a tryout. Said, we don't take kids that young. And I was there. He said to me, you can sit and watch. You're not, because I was younger.
And what year was this?
This would be it would be the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
The early 80s. So my brother tried out, and he was a serious guy. He's always been a serious guy. He took it very seriously. He was able to keep up, and he was allowed to join the class. And I would sit and watch. And I really learned a lot. And you have that younger brother, this desire, like, well, someday I'm going to be there. Well, that location closed, and my brother was heartbroken. Mm-hmm. He didn't know where he was going to, at that point, he felt like he had lost his home. He came upon Grandmaster Park in the early 80s. Grandmaster Park had his location in East Meadow at that time.
East Meadow, yes.
And he invited, and at that time, things had already started to transform. The Olympics was being talked about. Karate Kid was right around that time. So all of a sudden, the Dojang went from being a place where only, guys and select few women and children to being family type. And at that point, that's when I really got involved in the practice. I had been involved slightly before that, but got involved with Grandmaster Park. And it has been, my honor and my privilege to be with these folks ever since. In '93, to see that Grandmaster Park and his brother, the late YH Park, put together with a group of, again, as you said, these pioneers, the 11th World Taekwondo Championships.
Yeah, I was there. I was there as a little kid. My grandmaster was there. My father was there.
It was just, for me, it was so nostalgic because I was just at the Grand Prix. I was refereeing at the Grand Prix in Charlotte. I was working the Grand Prix in Charlotte, which was the first WT event in the United States since 1993. And to be able to be there. And Master Sieber, the USAT referee chair, one of the things that we share was he got his actual IR at that event in 1993. And we were both able to, his grandmaster, who's also recently passed away, we shared that experience. We were there in '93. And here we are all these years later, and it's still in our blood and it's still in our lives.
Right.
And
30 years later, 30 plus years later, sure.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing. So now, while you're on, this Taekwondo journey, when did you take the leap into becoming a referee? Had you ever competed before?
I was a very, I like to think that I'm a decent referee. I was a very poor competitor, but I like competing. I competed as a heavyweight. I'm a bigger guy. Yeah. I think in one year in New York State Championships, I got a silver medal. I came in, I made it to the finals. I was always powerful. I never like to say whether the game's better or worse, but in the evolving game, the older game.
I always use that word. I never say better or worse.
And the older game was better for me because I never had, even in now I have an excuse to have no speed because I'm old, but in my youth I didn't have speed. I always had power. So power was
and that was the game.
That was the game.
Trembling shock.
So, I did reasonably well, but as I started to move away from that, coaching just never was I like to teach, but coaching was never where I felt at home. And in more recent years, my grandmaster's son, Master Edward, he encouraged me. You're ideal to be a referee. You have the skill set. He said you really should pursue that more. And I said, I really want to understand this aspect of the game better. And I started to educate myself. Started to take the seminars. And it's just...
So that was your inspiration.
That was my inspiration.
You just needed one person to have faith in you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is... And again, what's the role of a master, right? So the role of a master is to be able to try to help people to be the best that they can be. So for him to see me and say, listen, I think you would thrive in this role. So as I've achieved certain successes, I always make it a point to... let him know and to let him, which he's so humble about it. He always says to me, it's your hard work. I say, no, but comes from the spark, right? It comes from that inspiration. So
faith. We always need one person to have faith in us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was it. And it has, I have never looked back on it. And it has been where I feel at home. I always say to people, being a referee, you have the best seat in the house. I have the best seat in the house, right? You couldn't buy a ticket that puts you as close to the action as I am. Sometimes that's blood, sometimes that's sweat, sometimes you get hit with the tears. Sure. But I love it. And the goal for me is to never phone it in. Is to always just be learning and evolving and growing and trying to be the best as I can. And as the game evolves, we must evolve. It's no different from teaching Taekwondo. Of course. We have to evolve and we have to be better and better.
But what I think is very important that you brought up, because, you know, sometimes there's always this sentiment or feeling that referees never competed. And I think it's very important for anyone who is becoming a referee to have that experience, to know what it is to be in the ring, whether it is sparring or pumse. You know, I feel it's so important, because a lot of times, you know, when things don't go right, I'm not going to lie to you, sir, the first thing we say to ourselves, did this guy ever compete?
I think that's a really insightful, because I think it is the life distinction between sympathy and empathy, right?
Yes.
You can't be truly empathetic if you don't have the ability to understand. And when we referee, we should be able to understand that these athletes, what it takes for them to get there.
Yes.
And if you've never been in that situation, you may take for granted the fact that there's really a lot of sacrifice that goes into making it to any event. And stepping, you know, that first time that any athlete steps into competition is overcoming fear, overcoming self-doubt, overcoming hardship, overcoming financial aspects, overcoming sacrifice. And as a referee, you really, really need to understand that where those athletes are coming from, to be able to understand that it isn't simply, you know, we're not playing Monopoly, right? It's a very, very different. There's a lot of hours that have been invested and a lot of emotional and family support, right? There's every athlete that walks into a pumse ring or walks into a sparring ring, there's a team of people behind them. You're not going to see them. You may only see their coach, but they don't get there. We always do this in the black belt test, where we make sure that those students thank their family, thank their parents, because they don't get there.
No, it takes a village
on their own, right?
It takes a village.
And so as a referee, you have to be able to be empathetic to the athlete's journey, to be able to understand that your bad decision, your wrong decision, can be a life-crushing event for them. It could alter the trajectory of an Olympic athlete, or their self-confidence, or there's a million things that could occur. Now, that doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, but it means we try to always get it right. We always want to get it right. And to the extent that we can fix when we don't get it right, we have an obligation morally, ethically, and professionally to do that.
And, you know, something you brought up, education. You know, as a high-level athlete, you know, high-level athletes go to seminars. They compete as much as possible. The way I tell my athletes is, think of a race car driver. A race car driver gets good because he races. He's always behind that wheel. You know, fighters have to fight. You know, whether it is, maybe it's a little different today because tournaments are expensive. You know, you have to have deep pockets if you really, really want to take it to a very high level. So you can't compete every other week, or you just can't. You can't do it. You can't do it. But there are seminars, there are cross trainings. So they constantly need to fight, you know, constantly be around higher level athletes, higher level coaches, you know, and you know, you learn. It's their form of education. Now, for referees, how important is education, especially if a referee aspires to want it? Because I'm sure most referees, they don't want to do 7, 8-year-old yellow belt divisions.
No.
They aspire to go up. They want to be in those world-class black belt divisions.
Sure.
How much education is involved?
There's a lot of education involved, and it's ongoing education. And I think there's a couple of aspects to it. And one is that you really need to buy into the program. You need to, very much like the journey. I always, when I talk to referees about education, I talk to them about, it's the same way that I view matriculation in the dojang, which is that you have to go into it not seeking the next level. You have to seek the education that gets you to the next level. Don't ask me about, can I test for orange belt? Ask me about, do I have the skills to be able to test?
What do I need to do to get there?
Right.
Sure.
And it's the same thing with being a referee. And I think that over the years, I've seen a tremendous understanding of this from particularly from USAT and the structure and the infrastructure there, that there's been this understanding that if we're going to build a good referee corps, we're going to build, USAT was named, one of the reasons it was named the best M&A in the world this year by the WT is partially because of the emphasis on the education and the referee education. And it's got to be an ongoing process, and it's got to be to make the referees better. You can't simply go online and, take a course while you're watching television and then say, I passed that course, I'm ready to level up.
Yes.
You have to be evaluated. You have to have real life experience. You have to have clinical experience. You have to have the camps, and you have to have the desire. And, I listen to people who talk about, well, there are rule changes and there are things, but there are ongoing referee and official education in anything. I'm a huge NFL fan, right? What happens every year? Every year there's a look at the rules. The officials learn the rules. As the season goes on, the interpretation of the rules change. What happens? The referees must be understanding of what is the international or what is the national approach. For us as referees, we have to understand what does the WT want. And we have to understand the psychology and the sociology of it. So the WT's perspective on sparring might be a little different from Poomsae because there's an Olympic aspect. And Olympics means what? Television. And it means viewership. And it means spectators understanding our sport a little bit better. When we go to tournaments, generally, what do we have? We have Taekwondo aficionados there. They understand the sport. They understand what's going on. When you broaden it to something like the Olympics, now we're bringing in people who maybe aren't familiar with our sport.
Sure.
And they're conscious of that. And that sometimes affects how the rules evolve. And affects how the determination of the rules evolve. So as a referee, you have to have an open mind. I don't care what level that you are. And it's a perishable, like Taekwondo, it's a perishable skill. If I'm not out there doing hand signals, then I'm in front of a mirror looking like a complete fool, doing hand signals, watching, making sure, because you have that tendency to lose some of those skills. And
it's a responsibility.
Absolutely. And we train together with the higher level referees. And for me, it's never been anything different. I chase the greatness of people who have been gracious enough to appreciate my desire. So in Taekwondo, I try to be around people that are significantly more seasoned and better than me. And in the referee world, I watch the ones that I consider to be the most elite in the world and study them. And that's what you have to do. That's the extra education that you're not going to get in a book or on a video, is spending that time courtside watching. Why did that referee make that decision? Wow, how is their body positioned? Wow, how did they deal with those coaches? How did they diffuse a situation and still come up with the fair result, but manage to maybe turn something that was really ugly into something that was fair and reasonable?
You bring up some amazing points. And what is a referee's number one priority in, let's keep this at sparring. In sparring, what is a referee's number one priority?
Safety is always going to be. It's always going to be. We are responsible for the safety. There's no person that's closer to those athletes when it comes to safety. And again, whether it's the 6-year-old green belts or whether it's the ultras or whether it is the world-class Olympic competitors, safety is going to be our first responsibility. And I think that as a referee, even as you're learning and fine-tuning your knowledge of the rules, you need to be cognizant of that your role has to be there, which is why as referees, it's so important that when the time comes to break the athlete, that we are able to get our bodies in, that we understand our body positioning, we understand our placement into the athletes, that we're not so close that we're interfering with the action, but we're not so far away that if we needed to be able to break the athletes, that we understand where our bodies need to go.
Sure. No, there's some great stuff. How do you personally diffuse? What goes through your mind to diffuse a situation? You have a rowdy crowd behind you yelling and screaming. You have an athlete whose emotions are running high, and sometimes a call doesn't go their way. Me personally, and this is something my father always taught me about competition. He always taught us that you should be able to win a match with 3 blind referees in the ring. If you leave a fight to the referee's hands, don't get upset. That's the mentality
your father and I have the same.
That's the mentality of a fighter.
I love it. And over the years when I've watched other combat sports, like I've watched boxing and things of that, I've always said the same thing. If the one clear way to leave it in no one else's hands but your own is you knock somebody out, right? So I get it.
Or win clear.
Right.
That's
right.
it.
Absolutely. And I was just at the Fire and Police Olympics, and I watched the boxing, and there was a U.S.-Canadian match, and it seemed so incredibly clear that the U.S. had won. It was clear to everyone from every country there, and the judges ruled against the U.S. in a split decision, and the crowd went wild, really wild, and you were like, that one is really hard to understand. And yes, I'm sympathetic to the referees and the judges, because sometimes the criteria that they looked at may have been different. But from my perspective as a referee, when you are coming up, it is very easy to be influenced by those things. I think you need to get to a point where the crowd is an exciting aspect of it. You need to understand the crowd, because you need to understand articulation and volume so that athletes can hear you, because sometimes the crowd can be very loud. But whether the crowd is happy or sad is not your primary concern. It is not. I've certainly been at events where the crowd could become a safety concern.
Sure, of course.
I've been at ones where referees had to be escorted out in international events where they didn't like the decision. But that goes along with the territory. Hopefully that's not the case. But when it comes to the athletes, my experience is the more heated the athletes are, the more composed the referee should be, because we're not buying into that. Right?
You can't fight fire with fire.
Right. You have to be able to be clear-headed. You can't allow the emotions of coaches. The squeaky wheel shouldn't get the most grease. You need to make your decisions and be confident enough in your decisions that your decisions are the correct ones and that they're the right ones. And I am a big believer that coaches have challenges for a reason, that protests exist for a reason, that if there's a wrong, that wrong can be righted. And I don't take it personally, because I'm human. I try to do the right thing. If a coach challenges, holds their card up, and the IVR overturns my decision, well, then that's what should have occurred. I should have done better. I should have ruled that. And if a protest occurs at the end of a match, and that protest overturns the final decision of the match, then that's the way it is. I believe that at the end of the day, the right player should win. And if the referee's ego stands in the way of that, then that referee should stand aside.
Yeah, now see, you bring up a very interesting point, and And I was just at a competition, and you've seen it all over social media and everything. You know, there was a bit of backlash from the refereeing, and a big part of it was because high-level referees were not in high-level matches, you know, and there were some ego trips going on. It was apparent. I've never had in my life a referee talk back to me, you know, and I was actually stunned. You know, it's what do you say to referees that do go on power trips, you know, so to say, you know, what would you, because obviously you've proven, and I've seen it with my own eyes, you know, how level-headed you are. You know, when people tell me about like referees that I respect and I look up to, I always bring up, you know, Master Juan Suarez.
Sure.
You know, and
one of my mentors,
and he
Master Arnaldo, Master Suarez, those gentlemen could not have been more selfless, and they were role models for me along the way, because you're 100% right. They understand and skilled, and it is my goal, especially as I'm a USAT referee vice chair, in working with the younger and the upper. When I say younger, I mean younger in years. That could be age-wise, could be older, but somebody up and coming, is that you must put your ego aside, and you must remember that it is not you're not there as a punitive, you know, you're not the lunch lady, right? We're there to administer fairness, safety.
You just took the word out of my mouth, because that man, I've heard him say this. I probably lost count the amount of times I heard him say this. He would always tell people, you might not like me, and that's okay, but I will always be fair.
Right.
You know, and that's why I have such a tremendous amount of respect for that man.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a saying in the WT, which I love, which is that we don't see country, we don't see school, we see red and blue. When we go into Safari, we see red and blue. It doesn't matter to me what your, you know, and again, we always structure this in the most fair way. So if I'm at an international event and the U.S. is there, then I will end up being replaced by someone who's from a different country. And that's fine, because the appearance of impropriety can be impropriety. But from my perspective, I never, ever have any type of grudge or ill feeling against anyone. And a coach, whether a coach behaves, misbehaves, gets excited, to me, we're not in the public library, right? We're in a combat arena. Coach has a right to get excited. A coach has a right to challenge. A coach has a right to be disappointed. A coach has a right to not like the outcome. That is the right. I will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, think any differently about that situation, and it will never affect the decisions that I make. If you have a challenge, the challenge will be looked at in the context of what it is that occurs, the decision I will make, and if there's an IVR decision, there's an IVR decision. My feeling on it is that we must remember the role of the, if not for the effort of the athletes and the coaches, the referees serve no purpose. We're there because of all of the hard work of there. So
this is
you end up in a situation,
music to my ears,
and
now.
I think, but I really, the referee corps that I share my time with, and I share, you know, the high level referees are they'll be mad at me for saying this, but we're all a bunch of nerds. Like, we'll sit and we'll go through scenarios. Like, we want to prepare for the seen and the unforeseen. No one wants to be out there winging it. We want to be able to know that we're understanding the interpretation, understanding the current
and we don't want you winging it,
right? And that's it. And that the decision is the right decision. You know, nobody wants to go and have somebody learning on the job. But that being said, part of getting better as a referee is learning on the job. But where does that normally occur? It normally occurs outside of the high-level sanction.
Exactly.
It's in the classrooms, in the camps, but also at the local events. When I have the opportunity to be ring captain to a bunch of younger referees, the coaches understand, well, we're at a local unsanctioned event, maybe a couple of schools get together. We understand. And we're also going to be much more likely to fix those mistakes that they make, because there's no qualifying points.
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to the Olympics. They also want it to be fair. So if I need to overturn and go outside of the parameters of what would occur at a sanctioned event, the coaches, the referees, the organizers all understand that that's the case. And those become your learning grounds.
Sure.
We're fortunate in this area. We're I speak to people all over the country, but in the New York metro area, we have a high density of tournaments, much more tournaments than many other places. So there are good opportunities for athletes, but also for referees who really are serious about. That's how I did it. Master Suarez and Master Jimenez would call me for every small local tournament. I never even heard it, never saw it advertised. Can you be in New Jersey on Sunday morning? I'll be there, sir. Okay. Under the supervision of an IR and learning and hopefully getting better each time.
Wow. Everything you're saying, I really hope young referees are paying attention to everything because it's so educational. And it's also educational, but it also should be humbling for them to understand, because you're not only speaking from the perspective of a referee, you're speaking from the perspective of a competitor. You're speaking from the perspective of a parent.
Sure.
I really hope the young referees are paying attention to this, and also for us coaches, to have a greater appreciation that there are referees who really, really do think like this.
Master Lupo, I will tell you that I think one of the most transformative things that a referee can do is take a look at your high-level coaches. They're not your adversary. They're your teacher.
Mm.
I learned a lot from the high-level challenges of really good coaches along the way, rather than thinking we're in an adverse situation.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
They're not against you. We're not against you.
Wow. What are the coaches trying to do? They're trying to use the rules to be able to gain the best advantage for their player. That's what a good coach does.
Yeah.
Now, as a referee, you're thinking to yourself, because my mind doesn't work in that coaching way. But now I've looked at the challenges that you've carved out or created from the rule set, the same rule set that maybe everybody else looks at, but you as a coach have a unique challenge that you've managed to look at a scenario and come up with a challenge. To me, you're the best teacher for me.
Yeah.
Because that scenario, I wouldn't necessarily come across that in my normal educational aspects of doing it. So to me, if a referee understands that the coach, the good coach, the aggressive coach, anybody can sit there and say motivational things. Do better, do great, those are nice. We see those coaches a lot. Those coaches aren't really coaching, right? They're advocating. They're might be wonderful people, but it's the good coaching that helps improve the refereeing.
Of course. I mean, at the end of the day, you brought up something very important, and that's why I asked you that question. What's your number one priority? The safety of the athlete. A good coach, our number one priority is the safety of our athlete.
Absolutely.
We're not. And then after that is, yes, guiding our athlete to victory the best way we can. At no point is a good coach fighting against the system. It's not us against you.
Sure.
And unfortunately, some coaches do that, and a lot of the coaches and I saw it with my own eyes this weekend, it happened because of some bad refereeing, Now, in regards of, coaches, fighters, when we get out of line, we do get reprimanded, whether it's a yellow card, a sanction, whatever the situation may be. Is there a system in place for, referees that when they do mess up, that something happens?
No question about it. I mean, depending on the level of what the event is, depending on whether it's sanctioned, whether it's USAT sanctioned or WT sanctioned, there are consequences for referees. And those consequences, again, are certainly bad action and malicious action has a certain set of consequences. But for the most part, what occurs is educational consequences. I sat in the Charlotte Grand Prix and I saw all of those high-level referees. When the downtime was there, the referee chair, from WT would analyze what occurred in that morning session and make those corrections for the referees. Now, if the referees are in really over their head, they may sit out. They may get suspended. They may end up in some sort of retraining. I have seen that. I think that it is, again, perhaps it is a
and I bring that up because I want people to believe it.
But that's,
I want people to understand
important, and
it.
I think that perhaps there's a not as much communication between the communities that maybe doesn't really understand that the level of that refereeing is taken so seriously that it is ingrained upon us from the WT and from particularly the USAT referee chairs that our goal is to make sure that the right player wins by virtue of their action, and that we should never be the one who causes the right player to our mistake, our inaction should never be what changes the outcome of a match. The same thing the dynamics to some degree is the same and different in Pumse. But in Pumse, the same thing. The difference in Pumse to some degree is that you have a 5-person panel or a 7-person panel. Sometimes a 3-person
and a lot calmer crowd.
You have a calmer crowd, although you'd be surprised. But you have a 5-person panel, which gives you the ability to absorb the mistakes a little bit better, right? Because it's not Kurugi, you have that center referee, right? Which is why to some degree, I've always been a Pumse, aficionado. I've always been passionate about Pumse. Kurugi was, I was much more apprehensive about it, and maybe for that reason that at the end of the day, it's what also makes it exciting is you're center stage there, and your decision. Yes, there's the table there that can correct your decision, but it's your decision that ultimately is going to really, really impact what it is that occurs. When you're in that Pumse realm, yeah, I might see it a little bit differently, but if the other 4 judges saw it differently from me, then my mistake, if we're going to call it that, is absorbed. It doesn't affect the outcome. So hopefully the team is strong. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit it's a little bit of a different situation.
Wow. No, great stuff here. I want to move away from that portion.
Sure.
And I want to talk about Taekwondo Life Magazine.
Sure.
The editor-in-chief of Taekwondo Magazine. How did that come to be? And what was, obviously there's a passion behind that as well.
There is, yeah. But I will tell you that the story about this one is so interesting because at the time that the magazine started, the industry had changed. Particularly, we come from a time as the one thing we did have as kids was a ton of martial arts magazines.
Oh my God.
It be, Black Belt, martial arts, fitness, Kung Fu, Karate Illustrated, Taekwondo Times.
I actually have the magazine that your Grandmaster was on, sitting behind my desk alongside, and I have my Grandmaster's cover also as well.
And they were great.
I was in that magazine,
right?
Also.
And you have feature stories, and you had all your technique training, and you have interesting stuff and movie reviews. And so, at the time that I had been lead correspondent for Taekwondo Times for a lot of years, and that was a lot of fun. It was a decent amount of work, and that magazine had changed, and I decided to move away from that. And I got called to a meeting with Grandmaster Park and another gentleman, and they said, we've decided we want to start a martial art magazine, Taekwondo magazine. And I said, that's great. That's phenomenal. I think it's a little odd, like everyone's getting out of the magazine space, but Grandmaster's a visionary in a lot of ways, and he doesn't, the trend is not where his brain works. Like he's a trendsetter. He always has been. And, he knows how to overcome obstacles, and he knows how to find niches. So, again, my initial thought was like, everyone's kind of bailing out of the print space because he's like, I really want it to be a print magazine. I said, okay. And they said, so I said, that's great. Just let me know how I can help. And they said, no, you don't really understand. Like, we want you to run the magazine. And I'm like, well, I've never run a magazine. I'm lead correspondent. It's not the same thing as running a magazine. And Grandmaster, in his infinite way of doing things, put his arm around me and said, I have no doubt you'll do fine. And listen, we are here to serve Grandmaster has been a paternal figure for me for all of these years. And I trust him. And the fact that he trusted me, again, inspired me to go, all right, I guess I'll learn how to put together a magazine. And that's what occurred. And it's been a very successful. And he actually hit the nail on the head in the sense that people have been excited to participate because of the fact that it is not simply a multimedia. It is a multimedia tool as well. It has the website. It has podcast. It has we do a lot of. We're on the news service for WT, for IOC, for all of the major theaters, for the martial arts movies releases. But the fact that it is a print magazine as well, a lot of the Taekwondo community, traditional Taekwondo community, has bought into it, and it's been a lot of fun. And
I mean, I appreciate it. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing. I don't care what anyone says. I know it's 2025, but it's one thing when you go hold something in your hand. I'm very
tactile in that sense too. Same thing with books. I like to physically have a book in my hand. So a lot of the beginning of it was me, writing a lot of the stuff. A lot of it was encouraging people. But as time went on, the submissions came in, and people. Every day I get people who say, hey, what are your parameters? What are you looking for? We'd like to submit an article about this, or we'd like to submit. And the one really limiting thing that one thing that we don't do is I'm not interested in my Grandmasters the best, right? You want to write some sort of an article about some contribution that your Grandmasters made. You want to write an article featuring your Grandmaster teaching something. You want to write an article about some event that's coming up. That's great. I don't simply want the magazine to become a public relations vehicle for, while that may be the soft sell for, hey, because everybody's Grandmaster is the best. Otherwise, you wouldn't be with them, right? So you feel that way. So, and we've been fortunate in that. And whether it be cultural, whether it be movies, whether it be technique, whether it be, and we're not limited to simply Kukkiwon style. We've covered ATA. We've covered things from the world of ITF. And again, we try to release news. We try to get, we're on the news services. So the things that are occurring in the Kukkiwon or WT or again, we AAU, whatever it is, we'll try to publish articles about it. And the IOC is, again, as we get into that Olympic cycle, the things that occur in the IOC world are there. And sadly, memorials and obituaries has become a big, a chronic thing because many of the old, legends have passed away, and we try to pay tribute to them in that regard.
No, it's important to, embrace our roots, to, obviously we talk about this all the time, especially, I'm a big proponent. I'm very involved in the U.S. Masters team.
Sure.
And, we always talk about respecting those that paved the way for us. Jumping back into the competition world, and then we'll also speak about the magazine in a bit, but jumping back, how do you feel about that when, you're at the competition and you are surrounded by those that paved the way, those, multi-time national team members, high-level coaches, how do you approach that as a referee in the sense of, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about, this guy knows who he is, while always keeping it fair for everyone else?
It is extremely, one of the things I always say to people is, I'm a very social guy, I'm a very friendly guy, is that when I'm in the tournament environment, I do not engage with non-referees. It is not because I'm elitist or arrogant or I don't desire to do that, but I believe that it's important for me to play the role of someone who is impartial and who is fair, so that I show my respect. I bow. I'll say hello. If there's a more local tournament, and certainly the older Grandmasters who aren't really coaching, I will make it a point to pay my respects to them and see them. But I make it a point to try to keep an arm's length If I see somebody that I know, I'll say hello. But I never want it to be perceived that there's something unfair that is going on, or that there's a relationship that's outside. Now, for me, I have the benefit of, because of the magazine and because of my history, being in this since the 80s, being an international referee, I know everybody. Sure. I don't mean that but the fact is,
the truth.
It's very hard for somebody to say, well, he's biased, and I don't coach, right? And I don't compete. So my role as a referee is my sole obligation, and I take that as my profession. So the fact that I know everybody, the chances are that if I go to a tournament, all of the coaches I've had some experience with, all of the athletes I've had some experience with, all of the organizers I know. So I keep my, and during the events, I don't socialize with anyone other than the referees. Mm-hmm. At the end, if it's a collegiate event or something like that, we may go out with the organizing committee for something of that nature. But short of that, I keep myself in a situation where no one can ever question my allegiances to anything other than the fairness of the game.
Like I said, I really hope, the young referees and the coaches and the athletes are paying attention to all this, because it is refreshing to hear. It does give, us as athletes, us as coaches, it's a breath of fresh air. It's almost like it's welcoming. It's welcoming. And, negativity seems to spread, but so does positivity.
I agree.
And the more that's put out there of this kind of mentality, it would only make the game more fair and only bring more people out. It's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Absolutely.
And and this is something I speak to other, school owners about. We're in a position that we need quality, because you've been around schools for many times, and we brought it up earlier, one bad decision, that student might not come back to me anymore.
No, that's true.
When one of the students loses, it's our job, to obviously explain to them why they lost, but also make them understand that, hey, today just was not your day.
Right.
But it's very hard to explain to them when they lost, when they,
sure,
when it was the wrong decision, and they'll go home and they'll say, I don't want to go anymore. And now for us as school owners, oh my God, that's the worst thing.
Well, I think over the years, what I heard when I did a lot of local events, not just as a referee, but just in general, is I would speak to people about local events. And when people would shy away from that local event, I would ask why. And there were two factors that always made coaches and athletes shy away from local events, certain local events. One would be sometimes the scheduling, right? People waiting to, way off the schedule, right? That's a different issue. That's an organizing issue.
Yes.
But the other main factor was poor officiating, whether that be outright bias, right? So I've been at local tournaments where you have 3 judges from one school judging, traditional Pumse, and the worst person who goes out there ends up with the highest score because the judges are, and that type of stuff.
And you've seen that firsthand.
And absolutely.
We see it too.
Sure.
Obviously.
And I don't see it as much anymore, but so bad officiating and bad tournament organizing. So tournament organizing's outside of my purview.
Yes.
But when it comes to the refereeing, I'm always conscious of the fact that, as you say, it creates the bad experience. And then what happens? Athletes and coaches say, I'm not going to go back to that event. I'm not going to support that event because there's bias or just, again, I've been at events where, and I respect the initiative, but you just pull anybody in to corner judge for a sparring match, and we're sitting there watching the when there's no PSS, you're watching the kicks and you're watching the punches, and the buttons aren't being pressed, and I see the coaches going, I can see the blood pressure, raising, and I get it, but it's a product of the fact that we're not dealing with trained referees. So When you're in a certain thing, you never can look at it the same way, right? So any event that I watch, especially a combat event, I always watch the officiating because I can't help but watch the officiating. I want to understand, what is that referee, good or bad? What are they thinking? How are they doing? How fair are they? How does it affect the outcome of the sport? Mm-hmm. I'm sure from your, as a competitor and as a coach, you probably have the same. You're watching all the time thinking, hey, is this coach doing, maybe I could pick up something from that coach, or maybe
Always.
I would never pick up. We do the same thing. We learn as much about the things we would never do as the ones that we would do. I see it with refereeing too. Not say it's a bad referee, but I go, that's just not my style. That's not how I would handle that. That's not a referee that I necessarily feel like is going to offer me growth, as opposed to another one that I might say, hey, that person's really got a style that I can connect with.
And that's great what you're saying, because the way I correlate it is we're students first.
Yes.
We're always students. We're forever students. And there's always room for growth. And there's also room for knowledge and education. And the importance of it is paramount in order to create the proper environment for the athlete, the coach, the referee, and the event as a
Absolutely.
whole. Because the goal of every event is what? For everyone to come back.
Absolutely.
Which is the goal of, obviously, the school owner.
Absolutely.
Obviously, the parents spending the money, to travel across the country, to follow, their child or the athlete's passion, because at the end of the day, this all costs money.
Absolutely. And those parents can go and sit around for a long time, and they're not, kicking the pad, and their adrenaline isn't flowing until that, very short time that can occur if somebody's eliminated in a round of 60, or a round of 32 or something, So I get it. But the point you raise is great. And I think that's true of everything in life. If you forget that you're a student first, then you really are not, we're either going up or going down. And you're not of value to your students as a master and a teacher. You're not of value as a coach. You're not of value as an athlete if you forget that you're a student first. We're always got to be learning, and there's always somebody that you can learn from. Always. And we, whether that person is, again, I always try to look at it as somebody teaching me what to do or somebody teaching me what not to do, because those are lessons, those are valuable lessons too. So sure. I try constantly to, and that's why you have to surround yourself with people that are motivated.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've given some amazing pieces of advice, and you've shared so much knowledge. If you could leave with one point in regards to refereeing for someone who has intentions on wanting to be a referee, or even someone who is refereeing who just wants to be better, one piece of advice.
My one piece of advice is to be humble and be open. Be open to growth, and always remember that the referee is not the star of the game. We are not the star of the game. And that is really important. And, wear a nice red tie, wear maybe a nice blue jacket, look very fancy.
It was a lot nicer than those yellow ones.
Yes, the banana suit. That's nice. That's nice to put on my Facebook page, but I am physically the center, but I am not the center of the attention in the game. And if I remember that, it is about the athletes. It's always about the athletes, and it always should be about the athletes. And any good referee will keep that in mind. When you think it's about yourself, it's time for you to get re-educated or time to retire.
Wow, that's amazing. And now, we go back to Taekwondo Life Magazine. Please explain to the audience where we could get more info on that, where we could check that out.
Our website is tkdlifemagazine.com. Very simple. Or you can put in Taekwondo Life Magazine. It'll come up. All the information is there. We print quarterly, and then we have special editions around other events. So we're doing like 6 times a year of print magazine. We always welcome the submissions from people anything that they have. If it's very, very timely, we put it on our website, and then it may or may not make the magazine. But I'm always open to people all over the world from that are interested. And it doesn't have to necessarily be Taekwondo related. We always say it's Taekwondo information or information that is of interest to Taekwondo practitioners. So training techniques outside of Taekwondo, or always been very popular is we do Taekwondo and MMA, which is where some Taekwondo practitioner breaks out and ends up in in MMA. Those ends up in the movies or things of that nature. We're about to do some sort of a feature. The students of NYU put together the Taekwondo team together with the film students at NYU put together a film production, and they're doing some sort of a premiere for that. That'll be one of the things that we'll cover.
Awesome.
And we try to be as topical and as interested to the Taekwondo community and the martial arts community at large, and we're always happy to communicate with people.
Nice. And where will we see you next? What's your next event, sir?
My next event I will be at Nationals, but Nationals will be my next big event. Will be the next big one. Of course, USAT Nationals, which will take place this year in, I didn't even know there existed in Ontario.
California.
I said, Ontario, we're going to Canada for Nationals?
Right.
But, Ontario, and this year we're one day longer because we're going to be a little bit of a bigger event, again taking place in California, which is a Taekwondo entity unto itself.
Sure.
And I think we're in that lead up to 2028. So the prominence of the LA area in the Taekwondo, Taekwondo is going to be opening the Olympics in 2028, which really says a lot about the belief in the power of Taekwondo, that it will be the opening act for the 2028 Olympics. So I think you'll start to see there are some discussions in the works. So there are going to be some other high-end events that are going to be in the U.S. leading up to the Olympics as sort of the precursor to it. So for me, that'll be it. And then we will wind down the year with a bunch of things. U.S. Open finals will be there, and there'll be as I said, there's tons of events going to be in this area over the next quarter.
Great,
and
sir.
I know I'll see you at many of those local and national.
Yes, you will, sir. And with a smile and a bow, because at the end of the day, this is all about respect. Sir, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. Very insightful, very uplifting, to a community that right now probably does need some uplifting in regards of refereeing. And sir, I thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will say that my grandmaster said it best years ago when I think we had first discussed you, and he's a man of very few words. And he said, "Oh, Master Lupo, he's a good man. He's a good man." And I said, "That's a bit rung true all these years as I've known you. You're a good man, and you're an asset to the Taekwondo community, and I appreciate your passion. So and we share the same passion."
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that being said, make sure to check out our sponsor, Mr. Joseph Ferrone of White Realty. All his information is in the show notes. Please check out those show notes. You'll see amazing info from our producers here at Press Record Studios. You're going to check out our official apparel company, Best Martial Arts Muto USA. KickFit, for that promo code BBWOL, get a nice little discount. Give us a like, subscribe. If you would like to sponsor a Black Belt Way of Life podcast, shoot us an email at ablackbeltwayoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Always remember the words my father always said: a black belt is worn around your heart, never your waist. A Black Belt Way of Life was produced by Press Record Studios.